Hello, everybody. This is Aram Melkoumov, and we're back with yet another episode of the Product Innovation Series, where experienced product leaders share their stories and life experiences on what it takes to ship a great quality product. Today, I'm joined by Jeroen Van Hautte. I hope I said that correctly. Who is the CTO and co-founder of TechWolf, which is a very technical company in the very booming and exciting HR space. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for the invite, Aram.
Did I say the name correctly? I hope I didn't screw that up.
Well, it's close. It's Jeroen, but a lot of people call me Jay if Dutch is not
Joren.
their first language.
All right, Joren. Okay, sorry about that. Cool. So the first question I have for you is really going to be about your journey building a product at TechWolf, right? So I know from what we got from like a previous call with you that you start off as a really small team of engineers, scientists, primarily focusing on the code of the app, right? And over the next kind of 3 to 4 years, building out the company and the product, you started putting more customer journey, a focus towards the forefront of your product. So maybe let's start talking about that. So like, how did you start off the initial kind of product, and then we'll work our way up into like where it is now.
Yeah, very good. So TechWolf, well, we got started, I think it's about 5 years ago that we first started working on the technology. So I met Mikael and Andreas, my two co-founders, in computer science at Ghent University. And I mean, essentially, like, of course, we really wanted to do something innovative. We wanted to start a company, but also we wanted to solve a problem that we were seeing around ourselves. A lot of our friends, they were essentially working in hospitality as a student job. And we always wondered, why weren't they applying their more specific skills to their student jobs? So we set out to solve this problem. I think being computer scientists, AI was a very obvious choice to look at to try and solve this problem. And sort of from there, along the way, we discovered that matching people with the right skill requirements, essentially, that this was a much bigger problem than just students and student jobs, but of course, really looking at the broader economy, like having the right skills in the right place at the right time is a key challenge for both inside companies and sort of between them. So that's sort of the root idea that we had. I would say, like, starting out as three computer scientists, or not even computer scientists, as we were still studying. Like, there's a lot that we learned along the way, of course. I would say that from the very start, we were really technology focused. And I think in the first year or two, maybe, we were really focused on building a technology, and we sort of equated it to building a product, which I think down the line turned out not to be entirely true, because the product that we built in the first place, or technology that we built in the first place, I would say was more of an expert AI toolbox. So you could do everything with it, given that you were already an expert in sort of handling it, which is great for our engineers. Like, we still use this AI toolbox in all of our products, but at the same time, it was not really productized. It didn't speak the language of the customer. It wasn't focused on solving the customer's problem so much as sort of the technical translation of that problem. And we really learned from that point to transition to much more of a customer-centric approach.
Okay, and so when you created the first iteration or the first version of TechWolf, it was very much, you said, a very technology focused kind of product. So was it like, what was it missing? Was it solving like what you thought to be the problem? From a foundation level.
Yeah, I would say we really did hit sort of the core of the problem from the technical side. So that, like, the technology, the core is still the same, except we missed the layer around it that we do now have, that translates this to sort of the domain of the customer. And I mean, we're in the enterprise space, so we typically work with large customers. It means the setup you have is typically integrated. It's relatively complex compared to a lot of consumer-focused applications, and it also means that the scope of your view of a product, it's not just the features you have in there. It's not just the experience in actively using it, but it's everything around there. And I think one of the big steps that we took from a mental model, essentially, is really going from this idea of the product being the collection of its features and how they work together, to really having the full experience, including the onboarding, any workshops that we give, any sort of tools we provide them to use with the product, because that's really what's setting the experience.
Okay. And so just correct me if I'm wrong. So you launched the technical product, you rolled it out to some enterprise clients. How did you acquire those first initial enterprise clients in order to start, using or being exposed to the solution?
Yeah, it's like at the start, it's very tricky. I would say, as students that have never worked in a big corporate, to try and sell to them, it poses a couple of challenges for sure. We we really went out and tried everything that we could, and it's one of the founders that I know. He always says, well, the trick is to be out there in the market. Because then you get the feedback and you get to a point you can start to iterate. And that's really what we did. We were out there trying to get meetings, trying to get into every conversation that was relevant, trying to sell, even if we weren't ready to sell to these companies yet, to really figure out how to sort of crack this tough problem. And at some point, of course, we got our first customers on board, and then suddenly you have a reference case. You can start talking to other companies and say, well, we're doing this with these people, so maybe you want to do something similar. And that's really where you can get the ball rolling.
Okay. And when was that kind of aha moment or the eureka bulb where you realized that you need to focus more on like the customer journey side? You might have a good technology sound solution, but you're missing everything up to that point. So like, was there something that triggered this kind of like revelation?
I would say it's getting more customers mostly. So TechWolf has always been very technology focused. So we're an API first product, very data focused. We don't have a user interface that goes straight to employees. So like the number of direct users we have is quite limited, even though we impact a lot of people that do see a lot of the data that we produce. So it's not your typical setup for a product. And I think that's also what created sort of a barrier to have the same user and customer focus there. Also combined with the fact that the skills data market is still relatively early, which means that while you're building in a more visionary way, you're saying, we believe the world is moving to this point, and we're building for the world when it gets there. And in the past couple of years, we've seen that the world is actually moving there, and moving there faster and faster. So I think it's been the combination of getting traction as a company, but also the idea of the skill-based organization and skill-based work really getting more traction in the market. And that's really enabled us to have the right conversations, to put our stuff in practice, and really get the feedback that we needed to start working in this more customer-centric way.
Okay. Just going back to that initial, release of your product that you had, the iteration, where did you go next after that? Like, how did you determine what the next feature items would be? Did you do any kind of discovery with like your early adopters to find out what like the gaps were? Just maybe explain that journey you went through.
Yeah, so the very first customers that we signed were often after doing a proof of concept with them, because, again, in enterprise, typically deals are a bit bigger. Like, people make long-time commitments to work with you as well. So they want to be really sure before you get started, unless, of course, they have more validation from other customers, knowing that it's going to be fine anyway. But of course, for your first customer, they want to kick the tires a little bit, and from every sort of interaction we had with prospects, so doing the testings, rolling out with them, often we learned there already what potential gaps were. I think one of the tricky parts with doing this in enterprise and sort of this more sparse scenario where you have fewer customers is, of course, that you tend to overweight the feedback that you get from the couple of customers that you have initially, and you don't really have like the option of having a data-driven approach. So you really have to go out there and see, based on this feedback we got from one or two customers, we're making this sort of this assumption, but you actually have to validate without having like 50 more customers to ask whether this is something that is something that generalizes to the population that you're selling to. And I think there, you always see that there's a drive to to build things that are specific to a single customer. So you have to take that step back and see how can we build something that will be valuable for all of our customers, including the future ones. And of course, sometimes you build something that ends up not being so generalizable. And sometimes you try to make something generic for everyone, and you actually just made a more complicated version of the very specific feature that someone asked for. But it's a learning process, and I feel like, as you gain more customers, it's just really important, not to forget the value that you provide to those early customers. Make sure that they're along for the ride so that you can really focus on serving the bigger population.
Of course. And it's a very interesting kind of piece you just opened up for me. I want to ask a bit more questions. Is a lot of SaaS companies that I speak with, there's always that, especially in enterprise space, about like, you get custom requests, very something niche, maybe focused to that, maybe that large client. And early days, when it comes to building a product, you got to pick, okay, like, do I discount that out from what they're telling me? Do I go validate it further to see if it's a larger need? What were some of like the main tactics or strategies that you used to kind of determine whether or not you should actually go build something, whether or not there would be the right kind of like interest or the ROI on that type of investment?
Yeah, I think the first question is always, how important is this to the customer that's asking? Because, when you have 1,000 customers and someone asks for a feature that you don't want to build, well, you can afford to lose them. If you have 4 or 5 in the early days, then of course it's a lot trickier, because if someone asks for something and it's really important to them, then it's just, it's a no-brainer to build it, because it's just too important to you as a company. So sort of getting that question out of the way, like, do we even have a choice in whether we surface this request? That's a pretty important one, because it really sets the scene for what comes next. After that, I would say sort of looking into the rest of the market and seeing, is this something that we recognize elsewhere? Like, is the importance there similar? Like, is this a need that we just didn't consider before, or is this something specific to this customer? Is also an important one. And then, of course, especially in the early stage, also you're very agile still in the way you approach the market. Like, you can turn this request into an opportunity as well, because if you find something unexpected that provides extra value to a customer, that's also something that you can use to further approach the market.
Okay. And so now what I want to ask is, when you do any kind of new feature development or considerations for like enhancements to the roadmap, how do you go about determining what you should prioritize?
Yeah, I would say for us, it's still largely sort of getting into a room with the stakeholders and really mapping that out, discussing this in a very human way. I think the next step for us will also be to really get more of a consistent process there, because as long as you as long as you manage to get people into the same room to rank the priorities, you don't really need such a rigorous process there. Essentially, you can just fight it out in the meeting and agree on it together. As you sort of approach the point where you can no longer do that, or there's too many priorities to do that in a single room, then consistency and a good method there is key. But I find that the lack of process can sometimes be a benefit as well, because if you're doing this in sort of a separate process everywhere, like, you can't just have people blindly executing on it. Like, you have to over communicate. You have to make sure that everyone understands why decisions were made. And by just getting together into the same room and having that discussion out there, even if it's maybe a little bit less efficient, you get the knowledge to everyone, which means that when time comes to actually change one of those priorities, people can actually say, well, I know that we were trying to do this first to achieve this goal, but actually to achieve the very same goal, we now want to move this thing up. And I find that that's really, really helpful to work together.
Okay. And in terms of milestones, what would you say were some of your biggest milestones that you had achieved throughout, the focus towards customer, thinking through proper customer journeys?
Yeah. First one, I would say, was getting our first customer. It's a bit of an obvious one, I would say, because like before that, everything's just a theory. And then you suddenly start applying things, and if you're lucky or you did your homework well, then of course a lot of the things that you thought were going to be the case are still going to be the case with this customer. But really, going hands-on, getting in there and applying the product was a key milestone for us. And following that as well, at some point we got a call from like our first customer, and they said, this one person got a new job thanks to your product, and they never would have had it otherwise. Like they would have just been unemployed otherwise. And I felt like that was one of the most energizing moments in like all of TechWolf history, because here was like a customer calling us and saying, this is an undeniable positive change in the world thanks to your product. And I think that's really a really important one, because, well, as engineers, very often you're focused on solving the technical problem. And, you even sort of have this typical thing with very tech-focused people sometimes where you say, well, the tech works, it's just them applying it wrong, or, if they're not getting the ROI from it, that's nothing to do with the technology itself. And we very much like to have the opposite attitude. And I think sort of the stories like that where, you really remember fully that, you're building this thing to make a change in the world. That's a really important one for the customer-centric attitude and really focusing on impact rather than features. And from there, I would say the next one was us really shifting to this more domain-driven approach, really having a big focus within engineering as well, and speaking the language of the customer, not just trying to make up a concept for ourselves, but really looking at the problem context that we actually see and trying to reuse the same building blocks to make the product as easy as possible to handle for our customers. And then, of course, the critical and most recent one, going to this full-blown customer journey. The trigger for that on our end was really essentially the product team at TechWolf has always been a very broad one, because we just have a product and engineering team, so it's quite integrated. We also have a solutions team that works with the customers for implementation, for customized setups, etc. And what we found was that we sort of had a lot of scope creep from the product focus essentially towards the workshops, towards everything that really involved the experience. And then we got together and we sort of realized that this was the next step for us to not just focus on features, but really having that broader customer journey in mind.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, I mean, how does your team structure work between the product and the engineering side? Like, how do you guys align in terms of, being on the same wavelength in terms of what needs to be done?
Yeah, I would say we're sort of at a turning point in the operating model of how we build things. We grew from 10 engineers to 20 engineers in the past 3 months. So that means that we're still running with the operating model mostly of a 10 engineer team, even though we grew to double that. Essentially, the way we work is we have 4 engineering teams with a separate lead. So that used to be 3 before, but now it's 4. Where the engineering lead is also acting as a bit of a product owner, I would say. Product management as well from the product team, and essentially we have 2 processes. One focused on the long term, really building that roadmap, getting the high level blocks together. Another one that's on a weekly basis, and that's really aligning on priorities every single week, making sure that what we're doing this week and today is contributing maximally to this roadmap that we have set for ourselves. And I find that in very similar vein to what I described earlier, like the getting in that room and really aligning on those priorities, that's really a good way to get velocity. Now, of course, we're taking that step to decentralize a lot of the product management within the team, and going towards more cross-functional teams as well. And I think that will really bring some big shifts in how we work together.
Okay. And I'd love to ask if you can share, how do you define KPIs for the product or the engineering team?
Yeah, it's a good question. As of today, we don't necessarily have a North Star metric for the product. Of course, we track a lot of different metrics along the lines of, how do we build the product? What's the usage, etc. But one thing that we have always wanted but have not yet identified is a single number that will tell us how well we're doing. I mean, if if you're Tinder, you have like number of matches made or number of swipes that people have done, etc. Like if you're TechWolf as of today, we don't have that single metric. It's also because, essentially we're a data product, and we don't necessarily want to align ourselves with amount of data exported or number of skills inferred for people, because those are outputs and not necessarily outcomes. What we do see is that like the ways that customers are using our product, they're converging more and more over time. I would say like the average, like if you pick two TechWolf customers today compared to the start of the year, you'll find that the similarity of like the exact use cases that they're deploying is much higher than before, which of course also connects to product market fit. So we're getting there. We have a couple of critical KPIs that we keep track of with all of our customers. Not everything applies to everyone, but really having that focus on not just having vanity metrics, but finding meaningful indicators of the value that you're bringing. That's really where our focus is.
And so, just curious. I mean, you mentioned before getting one of the milestones or the achievements was having one of your customers reach out to you and say, "Hey, you've successfully helped a candidate land a job." I think that's a very interesting one. It's kind of like Tinder, being matched, or like you can create a relationship from like a Tinder match. I'm just thinking from like a North Star metric for your clients. I know you don't have one yet, but what would that look like for you? If you were to consider one for your client success.
Yeah, it's like, again, this like I would say for me, the metric for the client success and the metric for the product and engineering team, it's basically the same, because I feel like as an engineering team and a product team, we should really be optimizing for the success of our customers. I think like sometimes there can be a little bit of a gap between those two, in the sense that sometimes you want to have an indicator that is not as lagging as really the downstream outcomes, and you want to have something that is a bit more directly influenceable by the engineering team. But generally speaking, I think what we do with TechWolf is we create a new type of data for these companies to use. And some companies use this to match people with jobs. Others do this to inform their learning strategy. Then others again do this to really zoom out and plan the capabilities of their entire company. And the question will be whether it's even possible at all to have a single North Star metric across all of these, or whether sort of every category of use gets a single metric, so that you can have success along different axes, but that we can still say, for a customer to be considered generally successful, we expect them to score well on 2 out of 3, for example.
Okay, interesting. In terms of your role at TechWolf, I believe you have like kind of like a CTO, CPO kind of like hybrid role, right? How did your role evolve, would you say, over the last couple of years? Like, what were you doing before? What are you doing now, especially with like the growth you've been going through?
Yeah, I would say there's been quite a dramatic change in the contents of my role over time. 4 or 5 years ago, I was just sitting at my laptop writing code. I was more or less the only developer in the team. Like my 2 co-founders, they're computer scientists as well, but they quickly decided to go for the commercial side of the company. So I was mostly writing code. At some point, of course, was joined by some really talented engineers. So then we started writing code together. As of today, I'm not sure if I can get through the quality assurance process with my code anymore, because I'm a little bit out of practice on writing everything myself, because really the focus has shifted to people in large part, and it's, I would say, the most important component of what I do today, whether it's enabling the people inside the team today or finding the right people to join in the future, but really also focusing more on the long term. One thing that I really try to be very conscious of is whether I'm working sort of inside the machine or working to improve the design of the machine, because it's often very tricky with the customers clamoring for attention, or like everyone wanting to go faster and faster. Like it's very easy to get caught up inside the process that you've built, but then again, the company needs to grow again next year, and you want to be able to deliver the next generation of things. And that's not going to work if you're going to spend 100% of your time just inside this machine.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, in your role, how much time do you spend, say, on a weekly basis, or biweekly or monthly, with the customers, doing any type of workshop or discovery exercise now in your current role?
I would say like a lot of what I do is directly customer related or prospect related. Of course, since we're a startup, like it's often optimizing by doing multiple things at the same time. For example, like I go into calls where we know that a prospect might be interested in something that we're considering for our roadmap, so that I can do discovery there. I join in on projects to really figure out how like things are going there with customers, whether we have any friction, etc. So I would say sort of between 1/3 and half of my time is probably spent in those situations. Of course, we also have things where we really get like the very proper user interview setup, etc. But I would say that often we learn by doing quite often. And that's really like a big advantage, I would say, as long as you really retain a reflex to zoom out as well and realize that even if you see something in a single customer project and there's very high urgency there, that's not necessarily a perfect reflection of all of your customers.
Fair. Another follow-up question to that is, if you only had 5 hours a week to spend on some activity, what would you spend that 5 hours on?
Well, that's a in what direction should I be thinking for that question?
Any direction, whether it's connecting with your team, whether it's reviewing the roadmap, speaking to customers. Where would you prioritize those 5 hours?
Yeah, I would say like for me the only non-negotiable in my week is probably aligning on priorities with the team, because I feel like there's the leader model for sort of how to manage a team that I really like, and it essentially says, well, you want to have clarity, control, and competence with your people, which means if you make sure that everyone has the right skills and tools to do what they need to do, if everyone knows what's really important to the company and to the team, and they actually get the responsibility of making their own decisions, that's a really good way to go forward. And I think especially when you don't have a lot of time to spend on sort of monitoring things, etc. Like these three are just crucial. And I think out of those, like clarity is the key one that you can provide every single week. Because in the end, if the team's not doing the most important thing, that's going to have a much higher cost than you leaving out anything else.
All right, good answer. All right, my second last question is, everything that you've gone through being a co-founder for this company, whether it's business or product, technology decisions, if you were to do it all over again, what would you not do? Or what would you better do?
I think I would probably start thinking earlier about sort of how to go to the next order of magnitude as a company. When you're caught up in doing a lot of things and doing a lot of different things, it's often very easy to start stretching yourself. But the thing is, like, you can only stretch yourself so far, and maybe that gets you to like 20% extra, 50% extra, maybe even double. But the thing is, as a startup, like you're looking to go times 3, times 4, times 5 year over year. So you're not really doing much by stretching yourself to do 50% extra, and instead really like sometimes sacrificing something in the short term to think about how we can redesign the thing to be able to go 10x over the next couple of years. I think that's something that we really learned along the way. Like we always had this mindset already, but really putting that into practice as soon as you can, like really building a growth model essentially for your company. I think that's something that we started doing a little bit too late. Sometimes there's a bit of an upside to it as well, because by really doing things yourself hands-on, you really get to understand where the critical points lie. But still, it's a tricky balance.
No, for sure. Okay, great. Last question. As somebody who's been going through this journey as a co-founder and the CPO, CTO role, what would be your final message you want to give to the audience?
I would say the main thing that I've learned is that to really solve a problem, you have to be somewhat obsessed by it, and you have to surround yourself with people that can also find the same passion for the problem. And I think everything else sort of flows from that. So yeah, that would be my final message.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Jay, for coming on the show and giving us this awesome insight. And always thank you to our listeners for tuning in and supporting the show. So appreciate your time again.